In this highly esteemed video, we are going to be talking about importing text. So let's look at a potential text file that we might be importing into Excel. So sometimes you're going to be getting data from a variety of sources, and it could be Access files, it could be text files, it could be Word docs, and there are tools within Excel that allow you to clean things up a little bit and facilitate the process of importing them. So let me first off look at this text file right here. It says lineups lineups ch38.txt. Alright, so what we have here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 columns of data. Now the contents of it aren't that important, but I will explain that this is a lineup in basketball from the Dallas Mavericks from at least a decade ago. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that were on the court together for a total of 9 minutes and 5 seconds. Over the course of a game. And so the home team is Dallas in every single case, and then there's who they played against in the first column. Okay, so looking at this data, if I kind of use my mouse or my keyboard to move around in here, it looks like there's plain white spaces separating these things, so just getting a feel for what's there. Sometimes we might have tabs, which would operate a little different. Things are offset there, so it's not in clean columns. But that's probably all I need to know about it at this point. So to import it, I'm going to go Get External Data from the Data tab, and I'm going to say From Text, and I'm going to click on this first file here, which is the one I was just looking at. And from here I have a couple pages of a wizard that I can use to help me import the data cleanly. One thing I could do is I could just go with fixed width, and we don't really, if it's working right, we see little lines go in between this that we can move around. And anyway, it doesn't really look like there's a good fixed width option here. So it says that the fields are aligned in columns with spaces between each field, and what that would mean is, well, here if I go and try to use this means I could drag this little guy back and forth, and one of the problems we would have is right there. That doesn't. So well, it looks like that would mostly work. But it's going to add a lot of spaces around our data once we import it. And so, well, I'll just do it just for fun, just to kind of see how that goes. So I'll click Finish, and it probably won't look too bad. Yeah, looks pretty good. Although if I click on here, well, to be honest, I can't really complain too much, although I didn't pick up my last columns of data cleanly, so I might have done something incorrectly. Well, so it looks like it cleaned up the white spaces better than I expected it to, but that's not the usual way that I would do this. That was just kind of an experiment on the fly. So let me do it again. So because I know that all of my columns of data were separated by spaces, I'm going to use this other option that says delimited, and when I do that I get this different option here, and it wasn't, if you recall, separated by tabs but by spaces. And so if I unclick that and click this, then everything cleans up real nicely. These black lines suggest where the breaks are going to take place in between my columns. So if I click Finish, then everything imports perfectly, which is exactly what I was hoping for. Okay, let's look at another text file. This time I will look at the version 2, and I've got the same columns of data in here. However, as I use my keyboard to move around, it jumps when I get to the white spaces. So that indicates that I have tabs separating my data. So sometimes you'll have spaces, sometimes you'll have tabs, and identifying which one of those you have will help you import the data better. It just so happens that importing with tabs is the default with text data. So I'm going to grab this file, and I'm going to say delimited, and notice how it's all crunched up this time, kind of interesting. And because the tab is selected, it breaks it up based on tabs. If I had done something else like space, Apparently that's not going to work for me, so I won't worry about it. So I'll just use tab. Now notice it could be a comma or a semicolon, just depends on how something was exported in the data that you got. So I'll click finish, and that comes in nicely also. Alright, let's go to another possibility. This time I'm going to look up this Word doc that says lineups, and when I open this, it's got the same data again, although this time it's in a Word doc rather than a text file. And so let me just walk through the process of saving this. I'll go Files, Save As, and I'm going to save it as a text file. Once I do that, and I'll just say, I'll add in an additional name here so I can distinguish it. I'll say from doc. Alright, so I'll let it do what it's going to do. Now I have a new text file. It says from doc. So let me go into here and see if I can import it. Get external data from text. I go over here from doc, click import. I'm going to say fixed width, or not fixed width, delimited, and let's see what we can play with here. Well, it doesn't look like tabs create anything that we want, so how about spaces? Okay, that looks good, or does it? Because it looks like sometimes we have teams in this column and sometimes it's missing in the last column, so something's wrong here. And if I were just to click finish, and I'll be honest, there's actually not a way to fix this based on our options here. And so if I click, well, okay, so I'll actually tell you what the problem is. The problem is, in the previous files, we took somebody's last name, which was Nick Van Exel. There was a player named Nick Van Exel, and we just replaced the last name with Exel. Previously, we just had single word with no spaces, first names, and single word with, we had last names that had no spaces in them before, rather. I forgot for a second that we had 5 different players. Anyway, so Van Exel is actually a player, and there's a space in his last name, and that's creating a problem because the spaces are being used to create new columns. So sometimes if he's not in the lineup, we have 5 players, but it looks like there's 6 if we include him. And if I click finish, then it goes all over the place. So that's not good. So let's go ahead and finish that. And one way that I could fix this problem is I could go into Word and click Replace, and I'm going to find all instances of Van space Exel and replace it with Van Exel. So if I do that, and I replace 54 replacements with no spaces in it this time, now if I save it again, it's going to take care of that problem. I'll call this from doc 2. And I'll create a new worksheet, and I will get that file, go to delimited and space, and this time everything's going to come out perfectly. Alright, now that you've learned how to do those things, I've given you an additional file that says kingslineup.docx. I'd like you to go in there and just on your own see if you can successfully import this text.